Yes, hello. First of all, thank you for inviting me here. It was pretty much a coincidence that I ended up here, I guess, because we were discussing a project that we are now applying for, a rather large knowledge platform for climate actions in Trondheim, and then we found out that you had this meeting here and that I probably had something to offer for this meeting, and then as another coincidence, just this morning I went to Oslo to present the project idea for the Research Council. So I couldn't be here in the morning, unfortunately, and did not hear what you already presented. From what I heard the last 20 minutes before lunch, it sounded like you already had some very good ideas and examples that I would have loved to see, but now I have to just assume what happened there. What I will do in the next half hour is, well, we start there. We all know it, right? Climate change is happening, climate change is human-made, and people know that all over the planet. But still, we don't act. There are some people, actually, to be honest, some people do something. But in broader terms, most people do not take it seriously enough to actually do something about it. And we have seen other environmental challenges where the reactions have been different. And there are some interesting psychological characteristics of climate change that make it different from other environmental challenges that we have. And I will talk about some of them. And I will go a little bit into detail about why it is so difficult to communicate about climate change. And then in the end, I will try to introduce something which I assume is also part of the project in Bærum, where like soccer teams are used. So maybe that can be connected to the we instead of I perspective that I come back to in the end. And then I will end my talk with some guidelines for tailoring messages to target audiences. But I have somehow the assumption that you probably know more than me about all this from what you said this morning, but we will see. Maybe you get something out of it. But let's start here. We all know it, people out there know it. If you go into your municipalities, people know it. Human-made climate change is one of the biggest challenges of our society, and there is hardly any scientific debate about it. Actually, there are very few scientific topics which are less debated than human-made climate change, because so much research went into that you might even find more people that think the Earth is flat than that think that climate change is not happening. I think deep down in him also Donald Trump knows about this, but he has other interests. So there are drastic changes in the way we organize our lives necessary, and yet we do not enough. And that includes, most likely, all the people that sit in this room. So we don't do enough about this problem. And the question is, why is that? Why is it so difficult why is it so difficult to act against climate change? Well, the problem is not so much worrying. We have enough worry. We know that it's happening. The problem is rather the inaction. So where does that come from? And there are some psychological issues with climate change, global climate change as a problem, that make it difficult to deal with. So we are, as humans, built for caring about our local environment, caring about people we know, caring about our family, caring about our neighbors, friends of our kids, and so on. So we think local. We care about the local. Climate change is a global problem that affects the local, but the links from the global to the local are pretty difficult to understand. Furthermore, climate change happens in large time intervals. The effects that we see now happening have been caused 30 years ago, 40 years ago. What we do now will have effects in 30, 40, 50 years' time. We think in shorter time intervals. Even one generation is quite long for humans. That makes it also very difficult. We are much better at dealing with environmental issues that are of short time spans. If there is an oil spill somewhere, we channel all the resources we need into cleaning up there, because it's a local thing and it happens quickly. The climate system is very complex, and there are a lot of non-linear effects, uncertainties in it. Naturally, it's built into the system that if you do something in one place, you don't really know when and where the effects will be, and it might be that it's stable for some time, and then you reach a tipping point, and then you have drastic effects, even not much more happen. And this is also something that we have difficulties dealing with as human beings. We can deal with linear things, where we know, if I do this, then this happens. And also cause and effect are separated in time and space. I already said that. What we do now has an effect in the future. What we experience now was caused way back in the past. It was not even caused by us here, but somebody else in another country maybe. And what we do has maybe effects on people living on an island in the Pacific Ocean. So how on earth do we handle a problem that is so big and so difficult to comprehend? So there is no simple single solution to that. If we look at, for example, the ozone hole, that was also a rather big environmental problem, but there was a relatively simple fix to that we could implement without changing our lives too much. We just exchanged some gases in the refrigerators, and we exchanged some gases in our spray cans. But we could do as before. We could use the refrigerators, and we could use even spray cans after some time. I remember when I was younger, we had these pump things where there was no gas in it. They have disappeared again, more or less, because there was a technical, simple solution that didn't mean that we needed to change our lifestyles. So there are some issues that are connected to climate change that make it so difficult for human beings to deal with it. And then I've been thinking quite a bit about this problem here. Yes, there has been climate change denial. And like 20 years ago, it was maybe here. So quite a significant number of people said, well, it's not real, it's not happening. And then after some time, it sank in that there seems to be some global change of temperatures. And you have a hard time denying that after looking at the numbers. So the next step in climate change denial was, yeah, okay, it's happening, but climate has changed all through Earth's history, and this is a natural change, and it will go back, or we will adapt, or something like that. Then, when it sank in that the change is actually happening much faster than a natural change would happen, then it ended up here. Climate change might be man-made, but it's other people who are responsible. Usually what you hear in Norway when you ask skeptics is, well, yeah, even if it's real, even if it's happening, and even if it's man-made, it's the US and China who should act. Who cares about what we do here, and we live at the North Pole anyway, so we have the right to use some gasoline to warm ourselves up. So you give the responsibility to others. But even inside Norway, it's quite interesting. We did an interview study a number of years ago where we did interviews in 4 different places in Norway. In Oslo, in Bergen, in Trondheim, and in Tromsø, which is quite far up in the north. And the identity in the far north is usually that, well, what they do in the south is nonsense, and we don't care here, because they have no idea under which circumstances we live here. So what we heard there was in Oslo, people were telling us, it doesn't matter what we do, look to the US. Whereas people in Tromsø told us, it doesn't matter what we do, look to Oslo. They should do something, not we up here. So that was quite effective for some time. Just recently, this one here pops up more and more. And I think this is really dangerous, the last one. Because up to here, you could always hope that at one point it will sink in. Now we get this response here. Oh yes, it's real, it's man-made, but well, it's too late to do anything about it. And this is partly caused by the way we communicate about it. If you look at the latest IPCC report, it says like, oh, well, we still have a window, but it's closing now in the next couple of years. That communicates to many people, well, it doesn't matter anymore what we do. We as well might have the party while the ship sinks. So we have to think how to get out of this trap here. So, what I've talked about so far is a lot linked to a phenomenon that we would call psychological distance in my discipline. So what we like to think is that, well, climate change, that does not hit us. It hits faraway countries, or it hits other species, not humans. We have the iconic polar bear that is in a lot of climate change communication. I think it's awful because it diverts the interest from humans to an animal that is somewhere far north. For Norwegians, it's even an animal that they don't really like. It's dangerous, it kills people. So that's a difficult communication strategy if you connect it to that. Climate change hits people in the future most. That has been an argument for many years. Oh, well, that's something for my children. Now we have more and more signs that it's actually happening already in many places and has been happening for some time. Climate change hits other segments of society most. That's also quite dangerous. So the people that suffer from climate change are not necessarily the people that cause it, and the people that cause it might not feel that responsible because they have the resources to protect themselves. I just recently saw a map, an interactive map of Norway, where you could see how far would the water come in if the water level rises, even quite substantially, like 5 to 10 meters. And most of Norway's coast, at least where I live, is so steep it doesn't matter. It doesn't reach our house. It's far away. You can't even see it on the map, which is very different in other countries. Half a meter means whole countries disappear. Norway won't disappear. What I do is just a drop in the ocean. That's also very common. It doesn't matter what I do. So for good communication, it makes sense to address this one. Why one drop in the ocean actually makes a difference if many drops are in that ocean. Or if the ocean is probably just made of drops. And it's too late to act. That is very dangerous now. Another one, Earth will survive, we will adapt. Well, I'm sure the first one is true. Earth will survive somehow. The second one, we will see. It will be very expensive at least, and it will cause a lot of social disruption. So what should we do? Well, one thing, and I've already heard this before in one of the presentations, is make this global thing local. Make it something that locally matters. And I think this yellow brownish grass here, which usually is brown, is a good connection for people here. Or when we talk to people in the far north, they were quite affected by that suddenly species appear there that don't belong there. So, or trees grow there where they usually don't grow trees. So such rapid changes in how the landscape that you are emotionally connected to, that your identity is connected to, local changes connected to global change, that is a way of communicating. For Norwegians, missing snow in winter is always a good communicator about climate change. So if there is no snow in winter, we are now in a period of the year where it should be colder. There might have been snow before, now it's relatively warm still. You might not believe that if you come from other countries, but it's relatively warm. And it's no snow across the whole Norway almost. So they even opened some of the mountain roads again because there was no snow. Make it personally relevant. This big topic needs to have to do something with my life, with the actions I have here, and the actions I do need to have some impact on this global thing, and it needs to be believable that there is this connection. Make it relatable, make the individual contribution relevant. Of course, if I switch off the light, even if I buy an electric car, even if I insulate my house, that alone will not save the world. But if all my neighbors do, if all the people in my municipality do, and if we can make that a movement that connects different municipalities, and if I can even show people those effects, give them a feedback that, well, since last year, so and so many are engaging in those small actions, and together it makes this big difference, then it makes sense. What we do a lot when we communicate about climate change is this dystopic scenarios. This is how the world looks in the future. But what this does psychologically is that we disconnect. If we cannot handle this, there is no way out in a picture like this. If you scare people into this is a big challenge that is very hard to overcome, then they will find ways of denying it because they can handle that psychologically. It puts a lot of pressure on people. So it's something that is scary. We have a lack of a positive vision. We don't know how a future looks like that is CO2 neutral. At least we don't talk a lot about that. And if we talk about it, it's often that we have to restrain ourselves. We have to travel less. We have to live in smaller places. We probably don't live in our villas anymore. So there's a lot of talk about losing things and losing comfort that we have. But there's very little talk about like positive visions for how does 2030, how does 2050 look like in a way that I actually want to live there. So, and what often also lacks in communication is solutions. So we are quite good in painting the picture of what is the problem, but we are not as good in saying people what the solutions are, especially what are solutions that they can implement in their everyday life and how do they do that. So even if we tell them travel less, that's not enough. We should tell them concretely what is it they can do in their everyday life and how do they manage their everyday life with a changed mobility, for example. So what we should do instead is, yes, describe the problem, that's important, but also present a positive vision for a solution and give concrete advice for action. All the way down till how do I implement that in my everyday life. We also talked already earlier today about skeptics and critics, and that is very much connected to media debate. And media is built in a way that it wants to have disagreement. So if you run a newspaper, it's not extremely interesting to tell people that another one agrees. They rather find one, if you have something about climate in the paper, they rather try to find someone who disagrees with you. Because in this dispute lies the energy and the interest that they want to sell. Conflict sells, disagreement is more interesting. And being neutral is, when they say we want to be neutral, then they want to show all sides of a story, even if one of the sides is very, very small. So when we have a debate in a paper, they do not pick 30 people from that part of the act and 2 here and 2 there, but it's rather 3 here and 10 there, because those are the ones that have like the most interesting contributions from a media point of view. And news always needs to be news, so there needs to be something the next day that is different from the day before. But in reality, I totally agree. I've never painted it as an egg, but I just last week talked to a politician, a Norwegian politician, who said, well, but how do we deal with those people here, and shouldn't we make sure that we get them with us? But they are far from the majority. They get a lot of space, but actually if you sustain and if you implement some solutions, over time they disappear, most of them. Some don't. They will always be there and they have that as part of their identity. But the people here, the neutrals, they will take a side, and which side they take depends on how you communicate with them. A good idea that I see more and more in Norwegian municipalities is just labeling some things a trial. So if you, like Trondheim for example, say, well, we close a road for car traffic, and you say that we do that, then you get a lot of opposition. If you say, well, we close the road, but it's a trial project. We do it for 1 year, and then we do an evaluation. And we ask people, but what they think. You You still get a lot of opposition, but it's less dangerous, because you can always say, well, if it shows after 1 year that it doesn't work, we go back to how it was before, because when you do it, you see that it actually works, and that there are improvements in the middle here. That the neutral people, they see that, okay, if that road is closed, then we can bicycle there. And then we can even sit on the street, and we can have, if the summers are getting warmer, we can actually sit outside. So there's something happening here, and they will not be that, will not have that much power anymore. But still, if we have a person that believes in climate change, and most people actually do that, also in Norway, although Norway has quite a high percentage of climate skeptics. Most people believe that climate change is happening and is human-made. There are a lot of things that can interfere with the link between beliefs and doing something. It could be what we call social norms and culture that interferes. Other people doing something. Other people expecting something from you. Your culture, or certain behaviors being engraved in your culture. If you, for example, think about changing food, changing diets, if the Christmas culture is built on eating a lot of meat, then it's difficult to change that. Lack of practical knowledge or skills. We are good at communicating about problem knowledge. We are less good in communicating practical knowledge. How do you do that? Skills, training things. So this cooking school that I saw in one of the slides is probably addressing this. Lack of control. This is when people think that, okay, it's a problem, yes, it's serious, but I can't do anything about it because I'm forced by the circumstances I live in that I have to take the car for traveling around in my municipality. So if this feeling of control is lacking, then people don't act. Habits and routines are quite important. So if you have done something for 20 years, you will not easily change it. If you have always taken the car for traveling around in this community here, you will not even think about alternatives to that. You will not consider a bicycle or walking or a bus. You might not even know that there is a bus. Lack of trust is also quite important. So if you don't trust politicians, for example, or municipalities or authorities, then it will interfere in this. If you don't trust your neighbors in doing something. Lack of resources might also be something. Sometimes it's, for some people, it's not possible. It's not only money that is in here, it's also time and other resources that could be interfering here. And there might be even more interfering factors. The last thing I want to say is that I recommend reading this paper here by Robert Gifford. It summarizes a lot of the problems that climate change mitigation has, psychological barriers connected to climate change mitigation, and I cannot go through all of them, but he lists quite a number of them. There are some things connected to how we think, so that we have a brain that is not adapted to this type of problem, which I already talked about, or there is this uncertainty that scientists are usually talking about. In the climate change reports, you always get some uncertainty for different scenarios. But the downside of this uncertainty is that people always can argue that, well, we don't know for sure. It's quite likely, but maybe not. And especially if something is bad for us, we have this optimistic bias. We think if there is a chance that it's not coming, it's probably not coming. So we don't have to prepare. So there's some in the way we think, but there's also something in ideologies that we have. Some worldviews are more prone for breeding climate skepticism. There's also this very prominent ideology that technology will save us. We don't have to change our lives because technology will save us. This is stronger in some countries than others. I would say it's particularly strong in Norway. It has a long tradition in developing technology for solving problems. System justification is also quite interesting. That is an ideology where you would say that if something bad happens to some other people, then they probably deserve it. They have done something that makes that they deserve it, so I don't have to change my behavior because they get the negative effects, and if they get them, then there's something they have done that makes them deserve that. This one here is very interesting. It's like the social norms that I had here and culture, so how much of our behavior is actually affected by what others do around us. The social norms that are in the community, what other people expect from me, especially how what other people say I should do goes together with what they actually do or not. Interesting here from a municipal point of view is that if you want people in your municipality to do something, you should be the model. So it should not be easy to say that, well, you tell me doing that, but there you are not doing it either. That would be quite detrimental. Some costs means that we have invested in things, in technology, in buildings, that we would lose some money on if we changed it now. Even if we, in the long run, would gain money, we are built in a way that first we start investing in something. First we bought our big diesel car. We want to keep it because we paid something for it, even if in the future it might not be allowed to use it. So there are big discussions going on in Germany now where they have started banning diesel cars from some of the larger cities, where people say, well, we have bought a diesel car, what should we do now? We've invested in that, and these costs are now sunk, and we have to find a solution which does not solve the problem, but rather saves my investment here. Probably I don't go through all of them, but in this paper you can see more. What I also promised you was focusing a little bit on this, which is part of a research project which I'm involved in at the moment, where we look at how framing climate change in particular, but also other environmental problems in a way that they focus on collective. So this is a collective problem. It affects groups of people. It doesn't affect individuals. And if we frame it like this, if we tell people that climate change is something that affects a group, in the best case, a group of people that already know each other, that have something, that share something, like a football club or a team of people working together or something. If there's some kind of collective and you can activate this collective, you get a higher willingness to also take actions that do not benefit you personally right away, that rather benefit the collective. So if we frame something as this is affecting us, not affecting me, and we need to do something about it, then we are more prone to actually also accept that I don't get the benefit, but the collective does get a benefit from it. So if we connect problems and actions to social groups, this might increase action, because then we more easily give up on personal benefits. Now the very last thing, messages should be tailored. If you address people are different. So there are, in each city, there live thousands of people who are very different from each other. So if you tailor something, if you design a communication strategy, it makes always sense to think through these questions here. Who are you addressing? Who are the key actors in this group of people? So does it make sense to find out who the opinion leaders are? Are there some people that you could get into your boat? Because it's always easier to communicate from within the group than from without. So if you can find someone within the group who is taking your point, that's much more effective. What is an appropriate channel to address people? It's not always Facebook, it's not always a video, it's not always a newspaper article, it could be many different ways. How can the message become personally relevant? which valued things might be threatened. So this is what I already hinted at earlier. Is there something that you could connect it to in the local environment? You said that it is easier now to talk to people here in Moss about climate change after the last summer. The downside is, well, if you get a summer next year when it's raining and it's 10 degrees, then you have all those, where's your global warming articles in the newspaper. We could use a little bit of that. By the way, global warming is not a good term in communication because it implies that it is warmer everywhere, which is not the case. What are they supposed to do? What is the solution? And what can they actually do? What are they able to do? And then look at what are potential barriers. Talk to people before you start a campaign. They know quite well what the barriers are. And which of them can be removed before a campaign starts. This was what I planned to say. I hope at least a little bit of it was not already said this morning. Thank you.